Hey, sweetheart. Are you okay?
Get that waitress away from my table. I don't want her dirty hands near my son. The words cut through the elegant chatter of the Crescent Bay bistro like a knife. Every head turned toward the corner booth, where a man in a $1,000 suit sat beside a pale, silent boy in a wheelchair. And standing there, tray trembling in her hands, was Aaliyah, the young black waitress everyone thought they could talk down to. But instead of snapping back, she simply smiled. That radiant, unbreakable smile. The kind of smile that had survived years of whispers, mockery, and the quiet cruelty that came with being seen as less. Welcome to Hidden Worth, where we tell black stories the world tries to ignore, stories about courage, injustice, and the hidden light inside people no one believes in. The man was Chase Whitmore, a billionaire CEO whose face had been on magazine covers for his perfect empire and perfect life. But nothing about his life was perfect. Not the mansion in Malibu Hills, not the luxury cars, not even the fragile boy beside him. His son, Ethan, had been born paralyzed. For 10 long years, every doctor in California had failed to explain why. His spine was fine, his nerves intact, but the boy could not move. He could not laugh, he could not live. Until that moment, until the waitress everyone dismissed dared to meet his eyes. When Aaliyah knelt to pick up a silver fork the boy had dropped, her gentle voice broke the stillness. "Hey, sweetheart, you okay?" The entire restaurant froze. And then, something impossible happened. The boy's fingers twitched, his lips curved, just slightly, like he was remembering how to smile. Chase's world stopped. For the first time in a decade, his son had reacted, not to medicine, not to therapy, but to her. That was the day a forgotten waitress walked into the life of a billionaire and uncovered a secret so dark it had kept a child trapped in silence. Stay till the end, because this black story will make you question everything you think you know about privilege, love, and the truth hidden behind perfect lives. Chase Whitmore was the kind of man who didn't walk, he entered. Every room, every deal, every spotlight seemed made for him. At just 43, he was already a household name in the biotech industry. The founder and CEO of Whitmore Therapeutics, he built a multi-billion-dollar empire on the promise of curing the incurable. Cancer, neurological disorders, chronic pain. If there was a headline about hope, it had his name on it. But inside the gates of his mansion tucked deep into the Malibu Hills, hope had packed its bags a long time ago. His son, Ethan Whitmore, was born with everything: wealth, pedigree, the world at his feet. Except his feet would never move. At the age of 2, Ethan suddenly stopped crawling. By 3, he wasn't walking, talking, or responding. Chase threw everything at the problem: the best pediatric neurologists, private hospitals, alternative therapies, even overseas treatments. Nothing changed. Doctors called it a neurological anomaly. His nervous system seemed intact, but something invisible had shut Ethan's body down. He wasn't brain dead. He wasn't in a coma. He was aware, trapped inside a shell that refused to obey. And that terrified Chase more than any quarterly report ever could. Ethan's mother, Elena, had been the heart of the home. She was warm, curious, and fiercely protective of her son. But cancer took her quickly when Ethan was just 5. After that, Chase turned colder, less human. He buried himself in work, letting nannies and house staff raise his boy while he flew across time zones in search of control he'd already lost. Only one staff member had lasted longer than a year. Harper, a stern, gray-haired live-in housekeeper who had worked for the Whitmore family since Chase was in college. She wasn't cruel, but she wasn't warm either. She followed rules. Ethan, to her, was a checklist: meals, medication, bedtime. The house was filled with beauty, expensive furniture, framed awards, classical music playing softly in the background, but it felt more like a museum than a home. Chase had money, power, and influence, but he hadn't heard his son laugh in over 8 years, and as far as he was concerned, nothing would ever change. Until a waitress from Inglewood walked through the gates, wearing a second-hand uniform and a smile brighter than any chandelier in the Whitmore estate. She wasn't invited, but she was exactly what that broken family needed. Aaliyah Brooks had never fit the boxes people tried to put her in. She was too polished to be from the hood, too pretty to be just a waitress, and too smart to be ignored, yet somehow, the world still tried. She grew up in Inglewood, a place where beauty was often dimmed by poverty, and dreams were measured in shifts and survival. But Aaliyah never let her surroundings define her. Her mother had raised her with two rules: keep your chin up and never stop shining. So she did. Even in her threadbare apartment with its leaky faucet and cracked tiles, Aaliyah kept things spotless. She took care of her younger brother, Malik, making sure he finished school, stayed out of trouble, and kept dreaming bigger than their zip code. By day, she studied nursing at a community college. By night, she worked double shifts at Crescent Bay Bistro, one of the most upscale restaurants in Los Angeles. It was the kind of place where tips could pay the rent if you knew how to smile through the insults. And Aaliyah had mastered that art. She was the only black waitress on staff. Most of her coworkers ignored her. Some rolled their eyes behind her back. And then there were the customers, the well-dressed, well-fed elites who saw her skin before her service. "Is it your first week, sweetheart?" they'd ask, knowing full well she had worked there for 2 years. One guest once handed her a crumpled $5 bill and said, "For that pretty little smile, you should be on TV, not serving food." Aaliyah didn't flinch. She didn't snap. She just smiled, said thank you, and kept walking. Because Aaliyah knew something they didn't. She wasn't waiting tables for their approval. She was building something. Quietly, steadily, on her terms. But behind that sunshine smile was a storm. She hated how people treated her like a prop, like her only value came from her looks or the way she lightened the room. She hated how some customers would laugh just a little too loud when she walked by, or whisper just low enough that she'd hear, "She's probably dating some rapper." But most of all, she hated how normal it had become. Still, she showed up every day, shoes polished, hair tied back, uniform crisp. Because every time she clocked in, she remembered who she was doing it for: her mom, her brother, and the little girl inside herself who still believed that goodness could break through even the thickest walls. What Aaliyah didn't know, not yet, was that her goodness would soon shake the very foundation of a billionaire's life. And it would all start with a dropped fork and a spark the world never saw coming. It was supposed to be just another Tuesday night. The kind of night where Aaliyah floated between tables, balancing trays and fake smiles, trying not to let her feet remind her they'd been aching since noon. That night, though, the reservation came under a name. Even the head chef whispered, "Chase Whitmore." A private booth, no media, no interruptions. The billionaire rarely dined in public. When he did, people took notice. Aaliyah didn't expect to be assigned his table. She rarely got VIPs. Management usually gave those to the face-friendly servers, code for blonde, bubbly, and not black. But when one of those servers called in sick, the manager had no choice. "Do not mess this up," he told Aaliyah, in a half-whisper, half-threat. She walked over with perfect posture, her notepad steady, her smile natural. But what she wasn't prepared for was the boy. There he was, pale, delicate, eyes half-lidded, slumped in a customized wheelchair that looked more like a medical throne. Ethan Whitmore. He didn't look at her, didn't look at anything. Chase ordered quickly, barely glancing up. Medium rare filet, no wine. His tone clipped, tired. His eyes never left his son. Aaliyah placed their water down. That's when it happened. As she turned to leave, she heard a faint clink. Ethan's silver fork had slipped off his tray and fallen to the floor. Chase didn't move. The boy didn't blink. No one else noticed, but Aaliyah did. Without a word, she knelt beside the boy. Her hands moved gently, gracefully. She picked up the fork, wiped it with a napkin, then looked into his eyes. They were empty. But then, "Hey, sweetheart," she said softly. "You okay?" It wasn't a line. It wasn't a trick. It was real. And something flickered. Ethan's lower lip trembled. One of his fingers twitched. It was barely visible, but it was there. Chase's head shot up. He stared at his son, then at Aaliyah, confusion washing over his face like cold water. "That was the first time he moved in years," he murmured. Aaliyah blinked, unsure if she'd done something wrong. But Ethan was staring at her now, not blinking, not breathing hard, just watching her like she was the only light in the room. And for the first time since arriving, Aaliyah felt like she belonged. She smiled again. Not for the tip, not for the table, but for the boy who had just remembered what it felt like to see someone. The next morning, Aaliyah was back at the bistro, tying her apron like always, but something felt different. She couldn't stop thinking about the boy's eyes, the way they had locked onto hers, the way his lip had moved, ever so slightly, as if his silence was cracking open after years of being sealed shut. She didn't expect anything to come from it. Rich people didn't remember servers, not after they left a tip and disappeared behind tinted windows. But that afternoon, her manager pulled her aside, face pale, voice tight. "There's someone here asking for you, real serious type, said he's got an offer." Standing by the front door was Chase Whitmore. No security, no assistants, just him. In a charcoal suit, hands in his pockets, and a look that said he wasn't used to asking for anything. "I need to talk to you," he said without preamble. "Privately." They stepped outside. Aaliyah folded her arms, not defensive, just cautious. "My son," Chase began, "hasn't shown that kind of response in almost a decade. Not to me, not to therapists, not to anyone." He paused. "I want to hire you." Aaliyah blinked. "Excuse me?" "I don't know what you did, or how you did it, but I saw it." "He looked at you, he moved. That matters." She hesitated. "You want me to be his nurse?" "No, I want you to be whatever you were yesterday. A presence, a companion. Just be around him." Aaliyah didn't answer right away. Offers like this didn't come around often, and definitely not to women like her. But her gut said this was more than a job. "When would I start?" she asked quietly. Chase exhaled, relief barely visible on his face. "Tomorrow. My driver will pick you up at 9. When Aaliyah arrived at the mansion the next day, the gates opened like a scene from a movie. Inside, the house was cold, grand, and silent. She was greeted by Harper, the longtime housekeeper, an older woman with sharp eyes and a voice like a closed door. "You're the girl from the restaurant," Harper said, eyeing her up and down. "This isn't a place for charity cases." Aaliyah didn't flinch. She smiled. "I'm here for Ethan." And just like that, she stepped into a world that was never meant to include her, but one she was about to change forever. Because sometimes, the smallest voice in the biggest house is the only one that matters. From the moment Aaliyah stepped inside the Whitmore mansion, something felt off. It wasn't just the coldness of the marble floors or the eerie silence that lingered between rooms. It was Ethan. He watched her. Every time she entered, his eyes followed her. Not in fear, not in confusion, but with quiet recognition, like he had been waiting for someone to notice what everyone else missed. Within days, Aaliyah became a regular presence in his world. She'd sit beside him, talk to him about her neighborhood, her brother, her college classes, and Ethan would listen, sometimes blinking in response, sometimes giving the faintest twitch of his lips, the kind of thing no one else seemed to catch. But Aaliyah did, and the more time she spent with him, the more one question haunted her. Why is this boy really paralyzed? Because the signs didn't add up. Ethan reacted to her voice. He flinched when a door slammed. He gripped her finger just once when she made a joke about sneaking him pizza. These weren't things a child with severe neurological paralysis should be able to do. So Aaliyah asked, gently, carefully, "Has he been reevaluated lately?" Chase looked tired. "We've had more doctors than I can count. Nothing ever changed." "Do you mind if I see the reports? I studied pediatric care for a while. Maybe there's something small everyone missed." He hesitated, then nodded. "Talk to Harper. She keeps all the medical files." But when Aaliyah approached Harper the next morning, the woman's response was swift and cold. "Those documents are private. Mr. Whitmore said no one outside the family should handle them." Aaliyah didn't argue. She simply nodded and waited. That night, while cleaning up Ethan's room, she noticed a locked cabinet in the study across the hall. The door was ajar. Inside, a folder labeled E. Whitmore, Initial Diagnosis. Her hands shook as she opened it. Dozens of pages, test results, doctor's notes, and then a gap. The pages jumped from July 2015 to October 2015, 3 full months of missing data. And one sticky note, barely clinging to the inside of the folder. It read, "Do not duplicate. H. H for Harper." Aaliyah's stomach sank. What was she trying to hide? She closed the folder, heart racing, mind spinning. Whatever was wrong with Ethan, it wasn't just medical. It was buried, deliberately. And now, Aaliyah had a new mission, not just to care for this boy, but to uncover the truth that had kept him trapped for nearly a decade, no matter who didn't want her to. It happened late one night. Aaliyah had just gotten home, dropped her keys in the chipped bowl by the door, and kicked off her shoes. Her little apartment in Inglewood was quiet. Malik was asleep, textbook still open beside him. The smell of burnt popcorn lingered in the air. She had barely sat down when her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She almost let it go to voicemail, but something told her to answer. A shaky voice whispered on the other end. A woman, older, nervous. "Are you the girl, the one helping Ethan Whitmore?" Aaliyah froze. "Who is this?" The woman's voice trembled. "I can't say. I used to work there. You have to be careful. You're the first one he's responded to, and they won't like that." Aaliyah's pulse quickened. "What do you mean they?" The line crackled. "I tried to speak up. Years ago. They told me I was imagining things, that I was just a maid. What did I know?" A pause, then, "Check behind his left shoulder. You'll understand." The line went dead. Aaliyah sat there, stunned. Who was that woman? And why did her voice sound so familiar? The next morning, Aaliyah was quieter than usual. She spent most of her time beside Ethan, watching him closely. When Harper left the room to answer a call, Aaliyah leaned in. "Hey, sweetheart, I need to check something, okay? Just a peek." She gently moved the collar of his shirt aside and her breath caught. There, just below the left shoulder blade, was a faint scar. Long healed, but unmistakable. About the size of a thumbprint. Aaliyah's chest tightened. She knew that mark. She had seen it before on children removed from neglectful homes, on cases where accidents had turned out to be far more. She looked into Ethan's eyes. He didn't flinch, didn't blink, but a single tear rolled down his cheek. That night, Aaliyah confronted Harper. "I found a scar on Ethan's back." Harper raised an eyebrow. Children fall. He was a difficult toddler. That wasn't from a fall. Harper's lips thinned. "You're overstepping." "No," Aaliyah said firmly. "I'm protecting him." Harper said nothing, just turned and walked away. But the air shifted. The silence of the house felt heavier, more watchful. Aaliyah knew then someone had something to hide. And that little boy in the wheelchair wasn't just sick, he was silenced. But not anymore. Because now, someone was finally listening. Harper had always been the shadow in the Whitmore mansion. She wasn't loud, she wasn't cruel, not in the obvious ways. But there was something about her presence that made the walls feel tighter when she entered a room. She ran the house like a ship, strict schedules, spotless counters, not a pillow out of place. And Chase, distracted by grief and business, had given her full control of the home after Elena passed. But Aaliyah knew something was wrong. And after the scar, she was done playing polite. She waited until Chase returned from a business trip and asked to speak with him alone. They sat in the study, the air thick with tension. "I found a scar on Ethan's back," Aaliyah began. "It's old. He didn't flinch when I touched it. But he cried." Chase leaned back, frowning. "What are you saying?" "I think someone hurt him, Mr. Whitmore. And I think Harper's been hiding something from you." Chase's face paled, but before he could respond, the door opened. Harper stood there, her usual calm cracked ever so slightly. "Is there a reason you're discussing private family matters with the help?" Aaliyah stood her ground. "You were the one who signed off on his treatments, weren't you? During the time those medical records went missing." Harper's eyes narrowed. "I did what I had to. That boy was out of control, screaming, throwing things. No one else could handle him." Chase sat forward, stunned. "What do you mean out of control? He was a toddler." Harper's voice rose, her usual icy calm unraveling. "He was dangerous, and you were too busy playing CEO to notice. I gave him something to calm him down, low doses, at first, but then I had to increase them, because it was the only way to manage him. Chase's hands trembled. You drugged my son? I protected him, Harper snapped. I kept this house running while you were off chasing investors, and when Elena died, someone had to step in. The room went silent. Chase stood slowly. Pack your things. You're done here. Harper didn't move. You'll regret this. You don't understand what that boy is capable of. No, Aaliyah said, her voice steady. You don't understand what love looks like, and you never did. As Harper was escorted off the property, Chase turned to Aaliyah. His eyes were full of shame, and something else, hope. Whatever happens next, he said quietly, I need you here. For him. Aaliyah nodded. I'm not going anywhere. The mask had fallen, the villain was gone. But the real healing was only just beginning. For the first time in 10 years, the Whitmore mansion felt alive. The cold silence that had once filled every hallway began to lift, replaced by something softer, laughter, music, and most of all, the sound of Ethan's breath deepening as he began to wake up from the nightmare he had been trapped in. After Harper's removal, Chase wasted no time. He called in new specialists this time, with Aaliyah by his side for every conversation. She didn't just care for Ethan anymore. She became his advocate, his voice. They took Ethan to a neurologist outside of the Whitmore network, someone with no ties to the family, no stake in the image. And what they discovered was both heartbreaking and hopeful. Ethan had not been born paralyzed. His nervous system had been disrupted over time, most likely from long-term exposure to sedatives not approved for pediatric use. The drugs had dulled his body's ability to respond, locked his muscles in a state of near constant shutdown. But his mind? Still sharp, still there, still fighting. And that changed everything. A new treatment plan was developed, focused on detoxification, physical therapy, and cognitive stimulation. Aaliyah was present for it all. She learned the exercises, the cues, the medical jargon. But most importantly, she never stopped talking to him. Every day, she'd sit beside his bed, holding his hand, reading him stories, playing his favorite songs, things no one had ever bothered to learn before. Ethan began to change. His eyes tracked movement more quickly. His fingers started twitching with purpose. One morning, while Aaliyah was telling a joke about her little brother's failed attempt to cook mac and cheese, Ethan made a sound, a faint, breathy huff. It wasn't much, but it was laughter. Chase cried when he heard it. He dropped to his knees beside his son's wheelchair and whispered, I'm sorry, I should have seen you. Aaliyah put a hand on his shoulder. You're seeing him now. That's what matters. Weeks turned into months. Ethan progressed faster than anyone expected. He learned to grip objects, to nod, to tap rhythms in response to music. And through it all, Aaliyah remained the constant. Not because she was hired, not because she was owed, but because she had chosen Ethan from the moment he dropped that fork at the bistro, and she saw the boy behind the silence. Healing doesn't happen all at once, but it always starts with one person who refuses to walk away. And in that house of wealth and wounds, Aaliyah became that person. Not a savior, a believer. Good news travels fast, but scandal travels faster. The moment word got out that billionaire Chase Whitmore had fired his longtime housekeeper and replaced her with a young black waitress from Inglewood, the media pounced. Tabloids ran with it first. Whitmore's new flame from bistro to billionaire? CEO's son heals under unlikely care or just good PR. Pictures of Aaliyah began to surface. Old high school photos, social media posts, blurry shots of her walking through the Whitmore estate gates, looking confused and caught off guard. At first, Aaliyah tried to ignore it. She wasn't used to attention, especially not the kind that came with flashing cameras and whispered judgments. But then the hate started. Comment sections filled with venom. Gold digger. She's playing the race card. Bet she's pregnant next week. Even worse, people from her old neighborhood started treating her differently, some with admiration, others with quiet jealousy. And back at the Crescent Bay Bistro, they fired her. No warning, no explanation, just a short message from her manager. We're going in a different direction. Thanks for your time. Aaliyah stood outside the place she had worked for 2 years, holding a manila envelope with her final paycheck, while a customer who once left her a $5 tip walked past and muttered, "Guess you finally slept your way out." She didn't cry. Not then. But she felt the sting not just for herself, but for every woman who looked like her and was told she didn't belong in spaces like that mansion. Chase offered to go public to speak to the media, defend her, clear her name, but Aaliyah shook her head. "I don't need the world to believe in me," she said. "I just need Ethan to keep smiling." Still, the storm kept brewing. Talk shows debated her intentions. Anonymous sources claimed she was manipulating a grieving father. Rumors swirled that she had ties to an activist group, or worse, that she was angling for a lawsuit. But through all the noise, Ethan kept getting better. And that, more than anything, was the truth no headline could rewrite. Aaliyah didn't chase fame. She didn't ask for attention. She offered kindness in a world that weaponized difference, and the world couldn't figure out how to handle that. But she wasn't backing down. Because once the truth starts to shine, no amount of darkness can smother it for long. The first note appeared on a Tuesday. It was early morning, and Aaliyah had just finished helping Ethan with his stretching routine. He was stronger now, not just in his body, but in his spirit. His eyes had light again. He laughed more. He reached for things. He responded when people called his name. Aaliyah always spoke to him like he understood everything, because he did. She stepped out of the room to grab his favorite blanket, the one with little rocket ships and planets, and when she came back, it was sitting on his tray. A folded sheet of white paper, written in shaky but determined handwriting. "Thank you for loving me, Miss Aaliyah." She stood frozen for a second, her breath caught in her throat. Ethan was watching her. His fingers rested near a crayon. Chase had started giving him more tools to draw, to practice movement. But this was more than therapy. This was communication. Tears welled in Aaliyah's eyes. She knelt beside him and hugged him gently, whispering, "You are so loved, baby. So loved." Later that evening, Chase found Aaliyah standing alone on the back patio, watching the sunset spill over the hills. "I saw the note," he said softly. "He's never written anything for anyone before." Aaliyah smiled through her tears. "He sees the world. He just needed someone to see him." Chase nodded, swallowing the guilt that had lodged in his throat for years. "I was so blind. I buried myself in work, in grief, in excuses. I let someone else raise him, and she nearly ruined him. But you gave him back to me." She turned to him, eyes clear. "He gave himself back. I just stood beside him while he did it." But then Chase did something she didn't expect. He knelt. Right there, on the cold stone tiles. "I'm not proposing," he said quickly, smiling for the first time in a while. "I'm apologizing. For every way this world tried to tell you that you didn't matter. For every time I thought your kindness was just convenience. You changed my son's life. And mine. I will never forget that." Aaliyah helped him up, laughing gently. "Okay, that was dramatic, but I'll allow it." From that day on, everything changed. Ethan kept progressing. He took his first assisted step across the living room floor 2 months later, holding onto a rail with one hand and Aaliyah's palm with the other. Chase watched in silence, a hand over his heart. And when Ethan reached the end, he looked up, breathless, and whispered, "Yes," whispered, "we did it." They had. Together. 2 years later, the Whitmore mansion no longer looked the same. The marble floors were still polished. The grand staircase still spiraled into the high ceiling, but the silence was gone. Now, there was music, laughter, the hum of life. Ethan had just celebrated his 12th birthday. He walked now slowly, carefully, but proudly. Each step still required effort, but he made them, every day. And every step reminded him where he had been, and how far he had come. But the biggest change wasn't physical. It was in his smile. He smiled often now, at books, at music, at his dad's bad jokes, and most of all, at Aaliyah, who had become far more than just a companion. She had become family. With Chase's support, Aaliyah launched her dream, a non-profit therapy center in South Los Angeles called The Rising Smile. It focused on children from under-resourced communities with developmental delays, kids who had been overlooked, just like Ethan. The center offered physical therapy, emotional support, and above all, dignity. The first child to walk through its doors was Malik, her little brother, now a high school senior volunteering in the reading program. Every hallway at the Rising Smile held a quote, painted by the kids themselves. One wall read, "What makes you different is what makes you powerful." Looking back, Aaliyah often thought about that night at the bistro. The fork, the moment that changed everything. She didn't have medical degrees or a famous last name. She had empathy, instinct, heart, and that was more than enough. Because the truth is, healing doesn't always come from hospitals or billion-dollar treatments. Sometimes, healing walks in quietly, wearing a second-hand uniform, carrying a tray, offering kindness when the world offers cruelty. This wasn't just a story about a boy who learned to walk. It was about a world that finally learned to see the power of compassion, to see the courage it takes to speak up, to see that no one is too small, too poor, or too invisible to make a difference. So if you're watching this and wondering whether what you do matters, it does. Your voice, your kindness, your refusal to look away, it matters. And that's what we tell here on Hidden Worth, where every Black story deserves to be seen, heard, and honored. If this story moved you, share it. Let someone else know they're not alone. And remember, sometimes, the most unexpected people carry the brightest light. We just have to look close enough to see it. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.